In a galaxy on the brink of war, a human prisoner is about to outwit a powerful alien intelligence. But the true battle isn't just for survival. It's for a future of peace. As Jaxen Corvus decodes the Nexolith, an ancient alien puzzle that could break minds, he uncovers a chance to bridge two worlds. But with the galaxy's future at stake, will he and the alien warrior, Kaelia Vorn, build something lasting? Or will their rebellion burn out like a shooting star? If you enjoyed this thrilling sci-fi journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more epic tales of human resilience and intergalactic adventure. Let me know what you think in the comments. Your thoughts could shape the next chapter. The violet moon clung to the edge of the horizon, its pale glow clawing through the narrow slits of Jaxen Corvus's cell, casting fractured shadows across walls slick with moss and despair. 19 days. He'd etched each one into the damp stone with a jagged crystal shard he'd wrested from the floor before the guard's three-eyed stares caught him. A quiet act of defiance against the suffocating dark. The air hung heavy, thick with the bite of rust and a sharp, alien tang like scorched ozone, a constant reminder of the Taran world beyond these bars. Jaxen sat hunched against the cold stone, his bruised shoulder pulsing with every breath, the ache a stubborn companion. The Tarans hadn't offered so much as a bandage. Humans, they sneered, were too primitive for their care. But neglect was a tool, and Jaxen knew how to wield it. In his hands, a cracked data tablet flickered, its dim screen pulsing with alien symbols. He'd salvaged it from a discarded crate shoved through the cell's slot days ago, its edges worn but its secrets intact. His fingers moved deliberately, tracing the base 12 numerals that danced across the display, each tap unraveling a fragment of Taran code. It wasn't much, a toy the guard would call it, but to Jaxen it was a lifeline. Knowledge had saved him before, through trade disputes and ambushes, and it would again. His hazel eyes narrowed, catching the faint glow of a new sequence, his mind bending the puzzle into submission. 19 days, and he was still sharp. A rhythm broke the silence. Footsteps, not the careless stomp of guards, but a measured cadence, deliberate and heavy. Jaxen didn't look up. He kept his focus on the tablet, fingers coaxing another symbol into place. The steps halted, and a shadow loomed, tall and edged with menace. Is this what humans do when caged? The voice was female, resonant with the Taran's metallic timbre, but threaded with something sharper. Mockery, yes, but laced with a spark of intrigue. Fiddle with broken scraps like vermin? Jaxen raised his gaze slowly, letting the moment stretch. Kaelia Vorn stood beyond the bars, her azure skin catching the moonlight like polished steel, smooth and flawless in a way that seemed almost too perfect, like satin dipped in starlight. Her three copper eyes gleamed in their triangular formation, the central one pinning him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken despite himself. Her crown of rigid, spine-like protrusions fanned out, a warrior's crest, marking her rank among her kind. The armored suit she wore was sleek, black-blue, clinging to her form with a precision that highlighted every curve and angle, both a shield and a statement. A puzzle gauntlet hung at her hip, its lights pulsing faintly, a device as intricate as it was unfamiliar. "I heard you," Jaxen said, his voice rough from days of silence, returning to the tablet with deliberate calm. "Just keeping busy." Kaelia made a sound, half laugh, half hum, that vibrated through the cell, low and resonant. "Busy with that relic? Planning to outwit your chains, human?" She shifted, her hand resting lightly on the gauntlet, her posture relaxed yet coiled, like a predator sizing up prey it wasn't sure it wanted to kill. The moonlight played across her skin, accentuating the faint shimmer that seemed to pulse with her breath. And for a moment, Jaxen's focus wavered, caught by the way her presence filled the space. "Maybe I am," he replied, his tone even, eyes flicking back to the screen. He wasn't here to play her games. Not yet. She crouched, bringing her face level with the bars, close enough for him to catch the subtle warmth radiating from her, a contrast to the cell's chill. Up close, her skin was mesmerizing, its glow soft yet undeniable, and her eyes held flecks of light that danced like distant stars. "I am Kaelia Vorn, first analyst of the Northern Grid," she declared, as if the title should shake him. "They whisper of you, how you turned an ambush into a parley with nothing but words. No blades, no blood. Is that true?" Jaxen let the question hang, his fingers still moving across the tablet. He'd spent years honing his tongue into a weapon. Diplomacy was just war by other means. Let her wonder. Kaelia tilted her head, her spines shifting slightly, a rare crack in her composure. "Tomorrow, you face the Nexolith," she said, her voice dropping, each word precise. "Not a beast of flesh, but one of logic. A cipher that breaks minds. The Overseer demands it, and I thought you'd want to know." He set the tablet down, meeting her gaze for the first time. "What's the catch?" Her lips curved, revealing obsidian teeth that glinted like wet stone. 3 layers of logic, no margin for error. "Fail, and you're ash." She stood, her silhouette towering once more, filling the cell's entrance with an authority that was both daunting and magnetic. "That toy of yours won't save you." Jaxen leaned back, his expression unreadable. "What do you call it?" She paused at the threshold, glancing over her shoulder, her central eye narrowing with a flicker of something. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. "The Nexolith," she said. "Your tongue has no word for it. Sleep well, human." Her footsteps faded, leaving only the echo of her voice and the faint hum of the tablet. Alone again, Jaxen picked up the device, his fingers moving with renewed purpose. By the time the violet moon dipped below the horizon, he'd cracked the first layer of the tablet's code, a faint grin tugging at his lips. The Nexolith wasn't just a test, it was a chance. And Jaxen Corvus had never backed down from a challenge. The twin suns burned low, their amber rays splintering through the crystalline dome of the Taran arena, casting a kaleidoscope of fractured light across the polished black stone floor. Jaxen Corvus stood at the center, barefoot, the cold biting into his soles like a quiet challenge. The air thrummed with the clatter of Taran voices, a restless sea of blue-skinned spectators packed into tiered platforms that rose like jagged fangs around him. Their 3-eyed stares bore down, some glinting with scorn, others with a flicker of curiosity. In his hand, the cracked data tablet pulsed faintly, its flickering screen his only companion. 19 days of captivity had sharpened his mind, and now it was time to prove it. High above, on a platform carved from obsidian and crystal, Kaelia Vorn watched. Her azure skin caught the dome's light, shimmering like liquid steel, her armored suit accentuating the strength in her form. Every curve and angle a testament to her warrior's grace. Her crown of spines fanned out, rigid and regal, but her copper eyes held no mockery today. They were steady, dissecting him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken despite the crowd's din. She leaned forward slightly, her gauntlets lights pulsing at her hip, as if she could see the gears turning in his head. A horn shattered the air, 3 sharp, discordant notes, and the arena fell silent, the crowd's clatter dying like a wave against stone. At the far end, a seamless panel slid open, revealing the Nexolith. It was no beast of flesh, but a towering construct of light and code, a holographic lattice of shifting symbols and interlocking grids that pulsed with an almost sentient rhythm. 3 layers flickered within it, each a labyrinth of logic more intricate than the last, their patterns twisting in ways that seemed to mock the very concept of order. Jaxen's breath caught, not from fear but from the thrill of it, a puzzle vast enough to swallow minds whole. The Nexolith activated, its first layer unfurling like a spider's web spun from starlight. Symbols in base 12 danced across its surface, weaving into equations that demanded decryption. Jaxen stepped forward, raising the tablet, his fingers flying over the cracked screen as he mirrored the code. The crowd erupted, their clattering laughter echoing like breaking glass, but he tuned it out. He'd faced worse. Trade summits where a single misstep meant war. Ambushes where words were his only shield. This was just another negotiation, with ash as the penalty for failure. Minutes stretched, the symbols shifting faster, testing his speed. He cross-referenced patterns from the tablet's decoded files, his mind slicing through the chaos. A sequence clicked, then another, and the web pulsed, its light dimming as the first layer collapsed. The crowd's jeers faltered, a ripple of shock passing through the platforms. Kaelia's spine shifted, a subtle motion, her gaze sharpening. Jaxen didn't pause. The second layer emerged, geometric riddles, shapes folding and unfolding in 3 dimensions, their angles defying intuition. He tilted his head, tracing their paths with his eyes, his mind bending the forms into alignment. Sweat beaded on his brow, the tablets hum a steady anchor as he input solutions. The layer shuddered, then dissolved, its fragments scattering like embers. The third layer was a beast of its own, a temporal maze, events woven into a timeline that looped and contradicted itself, history and prophecy tangled in a knot of logic. Jaxen's pulse raced, his fingers trembling but precise. He drew on scraps of Taran history he'd pieced from the tablet. Wars sparked by betrayal, successions fractured by blood, and wove them into sense. The crowd was silent now, their eyes wide, the air thick with their held breath. With a final tap, the Nexolith flared, a blinding surge of light that forced Jaxen to shield his eyes. Then it faded, its lattice crumbling into nothingness, leaving only the echo of its hum. The arena hung in stunned silence. Thousands of alien gazes locked on him. Then a single Taran shout broke the quiet, a word Jaxen didn't know, and the chant spread, rolling like thunder across the platforms. He lowered the tablet, chest heaving, and turned to face them, his hazel eyes steady despite the sweat stinging his skin. From her platform, Kaelia raised a hand, her voice cutting through the roar. "The human prevails," she declared, each word sharp as a blade. "But the true test begins now." She descended, her steps fluid despite the armor's weight, her silhouette a stark contrast to the crowd's chaos. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough for Jaxen to catch the faint warmth radiating from her, the shimmer of her skin mesmerizing under the dome's fractured light. Her suit hugged her form, its sleek lines drawing his eye for a fleeting moment before he met her gaze. "You solved it," she said, her voice low, meant for him alone. "No one's unraveled the Nexolith in a generation." Jaxen wiped sweat from his brow, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "Told you I'm good with puzzles." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, revealing the barest glimpse of obsidian teeth. "They wanted you to fail," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a murmur. "I didn't." Her central eye flickered with something new. Intrigue, perhaps, or the spark of respect. The air between them crackled, charged with an unspoken tension that made his pulse thud. Her hand hovered near her gauntlet, fingers brushing its pulsing lights, as if grounding herself. "I could have left when you won," she added, her gaze unwavering. "I stayed. I need to understand you." Jaxen held her stare, the crowd's chants fading to a distant hum. Her closeness was disarming, the glow of her skin casting soft shadows across his face, her breath a faint rhythm in the space between them. "Guess we got time for that," he said, his voice rougher than intended, a quiet challenge of his own. Kaelia tilted her head, her spines shifting slightly, studying him like a cipher she hadn't yet cracked. For a moment, her hand lingered near his, not touching but close enough to stir a warmth that wasn't just from the arena's heat. Then she stepped back, her expression unreadable, and turned toward the platform. "Prepare yourself, human," she called over her shoulder, her voice carrying a weight that wasn't just authority. "This isn't over." She ascended, leaving Jaxen alone in the arena's center, the crowd's chants swelling again, their alien word ringing in his ears. He gripped the tablet, its faint hum a reminder of what he'd done, and what lay ahead. Kaelia's words echoed in his mind, not a threat, but a promise. And as he watched her silhouette against the dome's glow, he felt the first stirrings of something deeper than survival. The Nexolith was just the beginning. The violet moon had sunk below the horizon, leaving the Taran fortress cloaked in shadow as Kaelia Vorn led Jaxen Corvus through a labyrinth of service tunnels. The air was stale, heavy with the tang of metal and damp stone, the walls slick with condensation that gleamed faintly in the dark. Jackson's shoulder throbbed with each step, the bruise a dull reminder of his 19 days in captivity. But he kept pace, clutching the cracked data tablet like a lifeline. Behind them, the distant clang of boots and the whine of seeker drones echoed, a relentless pursuit that grew closer with every heartbeat. Kaelia moved like a specter, her armored silhouette a blur of blue-black against the dimness, her spines rigid with focus. "Faster," she hissed, her metallic voice sharp but hushed, cutting through the tunnel's oppressive silence. She'd come to his cell hours ago, her copper eyes blazing with urgency, her puzzle gauntlet unlocking the bars with a single question: "Why didn't you leave when you won?" His answer, "Because peace is worth more than freedom," had shifted something in her, a crack in her warrior's resolve. Now they were fugitives, bound by a fragile trust and the weight of what lay ahead. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to sidle along a ledge overlooking a chasm where liquid crystal flowed, its surface shimmering with a lethal, iridescent glow. Jackson's tablet caught the light, casting fractured reflections on the walls. "That's not water," he said, his voice low, eyeing the river's hypnotic swirl. "Liquid crystal," Kaelia replied, stepping onto a crumbling stone bridge that spanned the gap. "One touch, and it burns through flesh in seconds. Don't fall." Her tone was dry, but her central eye flicked to him, a glimmer of concern beneath her steel. The bridge groaned under her weight, then his, its stones shifting with every step. Halfway across, a gust of static-charged wind roared through the chasm, sharp and biting, nearly knocking Jaxen into the abyss. Kaelia's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist, her grip firm and warm despite the armor. For a moment, their eyes locked, the wind howling around them, her azure skin glowing faintly against the dark. The air between them crackled, a fleeting pulse of something unspoken, trust, maybe, or more. They scrambled to the other side, ducking into a shallow cave as a storm of energy erupted outside, bolts of light tearing across the sky like fractured stars. The cave was tight, its walls slick with phosphorescent lichen that cast a ghostly green glow over Kaelia's face. She crouched, her breath a steady rhythm, her armor scuffed but unbroken. Jaxen slid down beside her, the tablet's faint hum a counterpoint to the storm's roar. The space forced them close, her shoulder brushing his, her warmth cutting through the chill. He set the tablet down, its light catching the smooth curve of her jaw, her skin luminous like moonlit jade. "Why help me?" Jaxen asked, his voice rough, breaking the silence. "You're risking everything." Kaelia's spines shifted, a rare sign of unease, her central eye glinting in the dimness. "My ancestor, Caliph, spoke against the wars that broke our world," she said, her voice low, almost confessional. She believed in peace, bridges, not blades. They exiled her, and my family's carried that shame ever since. I'm part of a faction that still whispers her name, hidden in the grid shadows. She met his gaze, unflinching. "You solved the Nexolith. You stayed when you could have run. You're proof she was right." Jaxen leaned back, the cave's damp wall cool against his spine. "So this is rebellion or redemption?" she murmured, her voice softening like a melody. She shifted closer, her knee brushing his, the contact sending a quiet thrill through him. "Tell me something human, something real." He smirked, brushing a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "We've got a saying, the mind's sharper than any blade. Save me more times than I can count." Her lips curved, a faint smile that softened her warrior's edge, and she leaned in, her breath grazing his ear, warm and deliberate. "I like that," she whispered, her voice a low hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest. Her hand rested on his arm, fingers tracing the edge of his sleeve, light but intentional. The lichen's glow danced across her skin accentuating its smooth, satin-like sheen. And for a moment, the storm outside faded, the cave shrinking until it was just them. Jaxen's pulse thudded, her closeness stirring a heat that wasn't just from their shared shelter. "You're warm," she said, almost to herself, her fingers lingering, her touch electric against his skin. "Humans run hot," he replied, his voice rougher now, his hand brushing hers, slow and deliberate. The contact sent a shiver through him, her glow pulsing faintly as their fingers entwined. Her central eye flickered, star-like flecks catching the light, and the air grew thick, charged with a tension that hovered between trust and something deeper. "Careful," he added, a half-grin tugging at his lips. "You're playing with fire." Her smile widened, a rare glimpse of vulnerability. "Maybe I like the burn," she murmured, her breath warm against his cheek. The moment stretched, their hands still entwined, the storm's roar a distant echo. Her skin felt like velvet under his touch, its faint hum stirring a primal curiosity, but there was tenderness too, a quiet understanding forged in their shared defiance. They stayed like that, the cave a fragile sanctuary, their warmth a rebellion against the cold stone and the drones beyond. The storm subsided, its bolts fading to a soft crackle, and Kaelia pulled back, her gaze lingering. "We move at dawn," she said, her voice steady but laced with something softer, a promise unspoken. She stood, her silhouette filling the cave's entrance, and Jaxen rose beside her, the tablet's hum a reminder of their purpose. But as they prepared to leave, her hand brushed his again, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of their moment in the dark. They emerged into a fractured dawn, the twin suns rising over a plain of black sand that shimmered like broken glass. The drones were gone, but the path ahead was treacherous, jagged cliffs, shifting dunes, and the faint hum of Taran tech in the distance. Kaelia led the way, her strides purposeful, but she glanced back, her copper eyes catching his. "The haven's close," she said. "Exiles, outcasts like Caliph. They'll shelter us, but they don't trust easily." Jaxen nodded, gripping the tablet. "Then we give him a reason to." His words were steady, but his mind lingered on the cave, her touch, her glow, the way her voice had softened. Kaelia's spines shifted, a subtle acknowledgement, and they pressed on, the sand crunching beneath their feet. The haven lay ahead, a flicker of hope in the wastes, but the memory of their shared warmth burned brighter, a spark that neither could ignore. As they crested a dune, the silhouette of a crystal spire emerged, its edges softened by time, a beacon of refuge. Jaxen's heart lifted, but Kaelia's hand grazed his wrist, a brief, deliberate touch. "Stay close," she said, her voice low, her eyes glinting with something that wasn't just caution. He met her gaze, a faint grin tugging at his lips, and followed her into the unknown, their bond forged in the dark, now guiding them toward the light. The twin suns blazed high, their amber light glinting off a vast plain of black sand that shimmered like a broken mirror under the Taran sky. Jaxen Corvus trudged forward, his legs heavy from hours of flight, the cracked data tablet now replaced by a sleek communicator strapped to his wrist, its faint hum a reminder of his ingenuity. Beside him, Kaelia Vorn moved with a predator's grace, her azure skin glowing like molten sapphire, her scuffed armor clinging to her form with a warrior's defiance. The storm and drones were behind them, but the weight of their escape lingered, etched in the dust on their skin, and the unspoken spark kindled in the cave. Ahead, the exile haven rose, a sprawling settlement carved into a towering crystal spire, its facets softened by centuries of wind and rebellion. Structures of fused stone and woven fiber sprawled at its base, alive with figures, scaled reptilians, feathered avians, beings with glowing hides pulsing in rhythm with their steps. Jaxen slowed, his chest tight with hope and wariness. "This isn't what I expected," he said, his voice rough in the dry air. Kaelia's copper eyes swept the perimeter, her spines rigid. "Exiles from a dozen worlds, outcasts, dreamers, survivors. They guard their trust like a blade. She glanced at him, her central eye glinting. Stay close, Jaxen. Her words carried a warmth that echoed their cave-bound moment, a subtle promise in her tone. At the gate of woven crystal, a grizzled Taran with faded blue skin blocked their path, gripping a staff of twisted metal. Kaelia Vorn, first analyst, he growled. A human? The bounty on you both could buy this haven twice over. Kaelia squared her shoulders, her armor catching the sunlight. He unraveled the Nexolith, proved his worth in your streams. Murmurs rippled through the crowd behind the gate. An elder emerged, her gray-blue skin weathered, her spines dulled but her gaze sharp. I saw it, she said, her voice cutting through. He stayed when he could have run. That's not our way. Jaxen met her eyes. Human stubbornness. I fix things. The elder nodded, granting them shelter, a modest dwelling of fused stone, a low table, a woven mat, lit by a glowing orb. Weeks blurred into routine. Jaxen's shoulder healed under a feathered healer's care, her taloned hands applying salves with humming precision. Kaelia hunted in the crystal forests, returning with shimmering game, her eyes brighter each time they met his. They shared meals, their talks stretching late. Earth's oceans, Taran spires, the weight of their pasts weaving a fragile bridge. One evening, as the suns dipped, painting the spire in gold and violet, Kaelia peeled off her gauntlets, her bare hands glowing softly. The exiles speak of a relic, she said, leaning forward, her central eye steady. The Unity Stone, forged in the old wars to bridge minds across species. It's in the wastes, guarded by drones and worse. Jaxen activated his communicator, pulling up a map decoded from Taran data, lines tracing the labyrinthine wastes. A peace tool. Her fingers brushed his hand, lingering, her warmth electric. We'd go together, she said, her voice low, her breath close. He nodded, their hands entwined, the air thick with unspoken tension. I'm in, he said, his thumb brushing her knuckles, her skin like velvet. Her smile was slow, her lips inches from his. I'd hate to face the wastes alone, she murmured, the orb's light casting their shadows in a quiet dance. At dawn, they set out, armed with scavenge gear, a pulse rifle for Kaelia, a multi-tool for Jaxen, and a map that promised peril. The wastes were a maze of dunes and ruins, the sand biting their skin, the air heavy with static. By noon, they reached a canyon of jagged crystal, its walls humming with ancient tech. Drones, sleek, beetle-like machines with glowing eyes, swarmed from crevices, their beams searing the ground. Kaelia fired, her shots precise, while Jaxen hacked a drone's signal with his communicator, turning it against its kin. Nice trick, she said, her voice sharp but admiring, as they pressed on. Deeper in, they faced a trap, a grid of light that pulsed with lethal intent. Jaxen studied it, his mind tracing patterns from the Nexolith. It's a cipher, he said, inputting codes via his multi-tool. The grid flickered, then parted, revealing a chamber where the Unity Stone rested, a smooth orb pulsing with inner light. But as Kaelia reached for it, a guardian drone, massive, its hull spiked, emerged. She fought, her rifle blazing, while Jaxen rewired a panel, overloading the drone's core. It collapsed, and they grabbed the stone, its warmth vibrating in their hands. Exhausted, they sheltered in a ruin, the stone between them. Kaelia's armor was dented, her skin glowing faintly, her breath uneven. We did it, she said, her hand finding his, her touch warm and grounding. Jaxen's pulse quickened, her closeness stirring the same heat from the cave. Couldn't have without you, he said, his fingers tracing her wrist, her skin's hum electric. She leaned in, her lips brushing his cheek, a fleeting spark that lingered. We're not done, she whispered, her central eye glinting, a promise in the dark. They returned to the haven, the stone a beacon of hope. The elder greeted them, her eyes wide. You've brought Calitha's dream, she said. The council will hear you. Jaxen and Kaelia exchanged a glance, their hands brushing, the stone's light mirroring the spark between them. The haven buzzed with whispers of change, but their bond, forged in flight and fight, burned brighter, a quiet vow to face the stars together. A year had passed since the Black Sands, and the Taran fortress was no more. In its place stood a sprawling plaza of crystal and steel, its open arches catching the twin suns' amber light, casting prisms across a crowd of thousands. Jaxen Corvus stood at the plaza's edge, the wind tugging at his simple tunic, now woven with Taran threads that shimmered faintly. The cracked data tablet was gone, replaced by a sleek communicator at his wrist, its hum a quiet testament to his journey. Beside him, Kaelia Vorn wore a flowing robe of silver blue, its fabric rippling like liquid starlight, her azure skin glowing with a warmth that drew eyes from every corner. Her spines, once rigid, softened with time, framing her face like a crown of quiet strength. Between them rested the Unity Stone, a smooth orb pulsing with inner light, retrieved from the waste through trials that had bound them closer than words could name. The plaza thrummed with life. Tarans with their three-eyed gazes mingled with exiles from the haven, joined by delegates from a dozen worlds, scaled diplomats with clattering tongues, avians whose feathers pulsed with color, beings of liquid metal who shimmered as they moved. At the center, a crescent of elders sat, their ceremonial cloaks replacing the armor of old. Among them was the gray-blue elder from the haven, her weathered face calm, but her eyes sharp. "You've returned," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd, steady as stone. With the Unity Stone and acclaim, Kaelia stepped forward, her presence commanding, her robe catching the light in a way that made her seem both warrior and beacon. "The stone proves what we've fought for," she said, her metallic timbre resonant yet warm. "Peace is not weakness, it's strength. Jaxen showed us that when he solved the Nexolith, when he stayed to build instead of run." She glanced at him, her copper eyes glinting with a pride that stirred his chest. "This is our chance, for Calitha's dream, for all our worlds." Jaxen took a breath, facing the council, the weight of countless gazes pressing against him. "I didn't unravel the Nexolith to win a game," he said, his voice clear, cutting through the plaza's hum. "I saw a chance, not just for me, but for all of us. The Unity Stone links minds, shows what we share, fear, hope, the will to survive. War's not the only path." His words were simple, but they landed like stones in still water, ripples of silence spreading through the crowd. He gestured to the stone, its light pulsing brighter, as if echoing his resolve. The debate stretched into dusk, the suns sinking to paint the plaza in hues of violet and gold. Questions flew, from Taran skeptics doubting Earth's worth, to avians probing the stone's power, to a liquid metal delegate whose voice hummed like a tuning fork, asking how humans dared mediate galactic peace. Jaxen answered each, his diplomat's tongue weaving logic and conviction, drawing on the tablet's decoded histories and Kaelia's whispered insights. She stood beside him, her hand brushing his arm during a pause, her touch a quiet anchor, warm and steady. Her skin glowed softly, its hum vibrating against his, a reminder of their shared trials, the bridge, the cave, the wastes. As twilight deepened, the elder raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "The arena's end today," she declared, her voice a blade of finality. "The Unity Stone will guide us to a new path. Jaxen Corvus, you are named envoy, to your Earth and the stars beyond." The crowd erupted, not in clatter, but in a chorus of voices, clicks, hums, songs, blending into a harmony that shook the plaza. Kaelia's hand found his, her fingers intertwining, her glow pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The moment felt vast, a pivot for worlds, but her touch grounded him, a tether to the woman who'd become his equal. Night fell, and the plaza emptied, leaving Jaxen and Kaelia on a balcony overlooking the new city, a fusion of Taran spires, exile curves, and patches of green from Earth seeds he'd shared with the haven. Stars glittered above, sharper than ever, and the air carried the scent of crystal fruit and hope. Kaelia opened a slender case, revealing a stylus of Taran craftsmanship, its surface etched with symbols of Earth and Taran, a bridge in miniature. "From the Council," she said, her voice soft, almost reverent. "Not for war, but for what you've built." Jaxen took it, its weight perfect in his hand, the etchings catching the starlight. "I mocked your puzzles once," he said, a grin breaking through, his voice rough with emotion. "They shattered more than I expected. Walls wars me." Her lips curved, a smile that softened her warrior's edge, and she stepped closer, the robe slipping to reveal the smooth curve of her shoulder, glowing like jade under the stars. "They remade me too," she murmured, her hand sliding to his chest, her touch warm and electric, stirring a heat that hadn't faded since the cave. "You're not what I thought. A human, stubborn and warm, who sees what others miss." Her central eye flickered, star-like flecks dancing, and the air grew heavy, laced with a tension that was both tender and alive. "Nor you," Jaxen said, his fingers grazing her cheek, the texture of her skin like velvet under his touch, its faint hum pulsing against him. "A warrior who fights for peace, who glows brighter than these stars." Her breath caught, and she leaned in, her lips inches from his, her scent like ozone and something sweeter, filling the space. "Trouble," he added, his voice a low rumble, a grin tugging at his lips. "And you love it," she whispered, her voice a melody that hummed in his chest. Their lips met, slow and deliberate, a spark igniting into a flame that burned away the distance between their worlds. Her hands slid to his shoulders, firm yet soft, her glow pulsing in rhythm with their kiss, a quiet dance of light and heat. Jaxen's arm slipped around her waist, pulling her closer, the fabric of her robe yielding under his touch, her warmth a contrast to the cool night air. The kiss deepened, tender but urgent, their breaths mingling in a rhythm that felt like a vow. Her fingers traced his jaw, lingering, and when they parted, their foreheads rested together, the stars above a silent witness. "This isn't the end," Kaelia murmured, her voice soft against his skin, her glow flickering like a heartbeat. "The stars are waiting." "Just the start," Jaxen said, his hand still at her waist, his thumb brushing the curve of her hip, a gesture both grounding and electric. "You and me, rewriting the galaxy." Her smile was radiant, a beacon in the dark, and she pressed a final kiss to his lips, brief but fierce, a promise sealed in starlight. They stood together, overlooking the city that was neither Taran nor human, but something new, a testament to their shared defiance. The Unity Stone pulsed below, its light a guide for the peace they'd forged, but it was their bond, forged in puzzles, flight, and quiet moments of heat, that burned brightest. The galaxy stretched wide, but in that moment, it was theirs, two rebels, equals, bound by a spark that had reshaped their stars.